Wow. It's very pleasant to be here in Florida. I don't believe I've been this far south in Florida before, so I was telling myself earlier today, for 48 years I've been making a profound mistake. And I want to thank Miles and Susan and Lorraine for inviting me to be here and making me feel so welcome. I want to thank Scott Cunningham, who shepherded Amanda and myself yesterday, and Julie, our intern in our workshop, and the members of our workshop. We had a great time this morning, and you all have made a collective contribution that's worthy of this great festival. And I'm very honored to be reading with Brenda and Patricia. So, thank you all. Me, myself, and Ham. I'm afraid we need to be reminded the imagination is a gift, and birds sing on fence posts and from the tops of trees disguised almost as green leaves. For your repast in haying time some June, you might select the shade and be reflective there, or look at a pile of stones beside the tree and not consider stones. To be diverted is better at times than being struck by singularity, because a good diversion has a way of taking you pleasantly out of time, to say so simply, and making you feel what always feels like heavenly to me. And now imagine being underneath the tree at night. What sort of singing will be there? And how will the dew taste on your tongue? Or maybe rain will flutter down in your concoction, and you'll remain in the rain, in the watery, musical rain. That was a hay poem from the early season. Now this is a hay poem from the last cutting of hay. Early September or so. Hay. In morning heat and passionate dew in the double meaning world, I walk the green symbolic hill. A task is waiting for me, but it's far away in my mind, and a kind of nothing is prominently there instead, unguided by reason or purpose. And a joy, not quite assembled or clarified, though stern and plain, has come to me, although I've made no effort in it, other than to walk the hill I'm walking now. A thing presiding invisibly, but known by sound, by distinctions in sound and silences between the various sounds. The gasp and jostle of leaves on branches vaulted and ominous, the intentional wind, the two-note jangle of a bird enthralled by the spectacle farther into the still, dark-dappled woods. But farther away at the outer edge of resonant rings of sound, and maybe beyond it, complicated for its singularity, I hear the breathless groan of some machine, as if it were a thing with feeling and a mind inside it considering its reason for being in the world. I imagine the reason now is hay, and probably a man is there commanding the practical machine. But I don't know. It might just be a machine. Besides, I have my own reality to think about, and the crux of having been raised to believe there is no such thing as happiness. but having evidence there is. It's a pretty strange situation to walk a hill just listening and to come up with all of this. When I was in school and there was a page in a book we wanted to remember, we'd fold over the top corner. Dog ear. And if it was really special, you'd double dog ear it. This is called dog ear. I bent the corner of the page and folded it over again to be sure. Apparently, I'd never forget the importance of something there. So serene it needn't wear the cloak of beauty, so undeniably true it need not be declared. Then years went by and I was thumbing through and came to the double dog-eared page. Whatever from instinct I'd imagined was there had become cumbersome with the passage of time. Even the line I'd made in the margin had dimmed, and the word in dimmer capitals was wow. Some people say I'm lucky I survived my education. I'm one of those. It was wrong-headed, or I wasn't the right person for the system. Crutch. That was another sign of not doing something right, to read with your finger following along, and worse, to read the passage out loud. We weren't supposed to hear the words or feel them coming out of our mouths. If we read like that, we were using a crutch. I used to imagine a face behind my eyes, and there I could see a mouth pronouncing the words, and it made a voice I could listen to. That's how I read. And we weren't supposed to count on our fingers, so I hid my hands in my lap and tapped on my thighs or the underside of the desk as if I were playing an instrument. But I was counting, carrying over the tens from the column of ones, or when I needed to add another 8 to 64, I'd tap it out, because I could only go so far doing my times from memory. There was something wrong if you used your fingers to count. And most of the children I knew who did learned either to hide it or eventually how to stop counting. Soup. I had a few potatoes once that I'd set aside to use for seed, but I was hungry and I thought resourceful, so I cut out the eyes with an old knife, hoping to save a few for spring. Left on the board irregular and jagged, they looked like a map of countries, one split off from another following some dispute. I was poor and doing different jobs back then and dreaming what I might be, as if what I was were nothing yet. And I was reading and listening and going into the woods at night. The potatoes I cut into smaller pieces and dropped them into the cook pot with about a gallon of water, some pepper, and the little bit of salt I had. I lit the fire and let it cook, simmering it for hours. I called it soup, and I wanted it to last. Listening to 3 barn owls. Occasionally a walnut plops and leaves an after splash in one of several remaining audible pools that mark this stretch of waning stream. The trill of crickets ambles slowly and comes to rest and leaves the sense of having been a resonance, because the night is opening itself to the cold. Now everything that is will have to do with less. From evenly spread out points along the ridge, I hear 3 owls, all 3 delivering the same 2-note yoo-hoo, lonely and solitary at once. It isn't clear if their calling is to each other or if each has simply found the elevation of the ridge and being higher still in a more remote tree below the glow left from an absent moon is sufficient cause to call. I have tried to be precise describing this, an evocation that even when it reaches silence is summoning. There will be the warmer morning, and then I could think perhaps of metaphors. But what would be the point of that? Why I am not a Stoic. By now, I've seen it all. The weird, translucent yellow spider hauling her pale pearl of eggs, or the spores of the reddish fungus fuming out from its half-inch smokestack in the moss, and even the damp shade commencing with the woods and seeming like water steadily to flow away. How these go unattended. An observation so smug and pithy, I ought to take it back. But I mean it as a fact, as a starting point in case a philosophical moment arrives. It would suit me if it didn't, because a philosophy based on shade and moss would be difficult to prove. I've made a claim, the appearance of something that seems singular but probably isn't, and that an irony observed in what I thought was solitude. But I was never alone in the shade. I had the shade and the moss inside it, and the poof of spores and the yellow spider swinging back and forth like a bulb in a room with someone listening to nothing, or a bug flicking against the black pane of the window. We have a form inside a mesmerizing form. I'm itching to say something nice about it. It's pleasantly slow and may appeal to objectivity, but maybe not. Let's let it be nighttime now, up there in the dome of contemplation. No light. No need to have a light. Let's give it a rest. Let's say good night, you little idea. Excuse me. Grammar. My last grandmother, dead by now, for 20 years, with another sad, erasing century underway, was from the 19th one, and knew what life was like with almost nothing to covet or possess or demean. And her acceptance of it, though I wouldn't call it happy, was wise. I never heard a complaining word pass by her lips. She didn't spend the life she had wishing for another one. She had an old muzzle loader named for its use, the hog rifle. I remember liking the click, both in sound and steady feeling beneath my thumb, and then the second tighter click I felt when secretly I'd cock the hammer back and study close the remaining shiny spot on the top, worn and polished by the thumb of her father's father first, a man, she said, who could read right powerful and had taught himself a heap of things. And then I'd trace my thumb on the spot to ease the hammer down when I felt with my finger the trigger's soft release. This, in a corner by the stove where the rifle leaned like a long leg, and through the wisp of shadow blew triangulation into the room. Repeating with my thumb and finger the motion and the sound preceding oblivion, I was reading too, from a book beginning and ending in darkness, though not the utter darkness of grief, rather a dark summoning hope. This evening, with violence in the air, I saw a hawk's white, yielding breast and underwings upended by the wind, and dead leaves blasted from withered trees hung and whirled precisely in the moment when the hawk was nailed to the black sky. That is the wonder of confusion. It becomes right powerful in time. An orchard at the bottom of a hill for Claudia Emerson and Kent Ippolito. Why don't you try just being quiet? If you can find some silence, maybe you can listen to it. How it works is interesting. I really can't explain it, but you know it when it's happening. You realize you're marveling at apple blossoms and how they're clustered on the tree, and you see the bees meticulously attending every blossom there, and you think the tree is kind of sighing. Such careful beauty in the making. And then you think, it's really quiet, but I am not alone in this world. That's how you know it's happening. There's something solemn and wonderful in the quiet, a slow and steady ease. Whether the tree is actually sighing is beside the point. It's better to wonder. You needn't be precise with quiet. It just becomes another thing. It isn't a science. It's an art, like love, or a dog who's pretty good, asleep in the grass beneath the tree. Scarecrow. In my grandmother's garden once, she let me make the scarecrow. But the one I wanted to make was too involved, too lifelike, and so he got reduced to a pair of sticks fastened together, I recall, by half of a bootlace into a T. I stabbed him into the stony ground. He was about my size, but that was all we had in common. He stared into his patch of the world. The scarecrow was ahead of me in solitude. When I wondered why he didn't have shoes, she said, "A scarecrow don't have feet, honey, elsewise he'd run away because he'd be scared of himself." Except, she said, he'd be scared. and apparently adding another note to the word made me remember it. And by the time I finished, the scarecrow I thought was a man was wearing a dress mysteriously and looked like her, returning from a funeral. A symbol, something that mattered once, something I loved and blindly loved. I think I'm going to skip a couple here in the interest of time. Two birds. The staves had rotted from a barrel, leaving me a few hoops. And prompted by an impulse to keep the world in a way alive, I hung a hoop on the end of the giant T made by the clothesline pole to see how it would look. And then I moved the hoop to the other end of the T, and now I had a T and an O. Two, nothing in particular, or everything in general. I left it open-ended. Sometimes a pair of birds will perch in the hoop, and then the double meanings fly. We have a situation in which a red bird sings in the tree above the blind dog, who is staggering in the shade until he feels it, the cooler ground, and down he goes in a blind dog heap. The problem, as I see it, is by singing, the red bird has helped the blind dog to find his place in the dimple of ground under the tree. Where else would the red bird sing? Things and where they are and how, when they're together, they make the world more something. I was going to say, but don't know now what that would be. Philosophy just doesn't get it. Not any branch I've heard about. I believe in suffering, but only up to a point before I believe in whatever else there is beyond it. I also believe there are dogs in heaven and trees, and in them singing birds. And nobody has any money there. I've got four more, sorry. This is a quote attributed to Catherine Blake, William Blake's wife. Someone came over to their house and noted there wasn't a bar of soap to be found. And said, "Where do y'all keep the soap?" And Catherine Blake apparently said, "Mr. Blake's skin don't dirt." So that's the title here. Because the vanishing point hovers ridges away and miles in the distance of gray-green oblivion to illuminate on a nearer ridge the white speck of a house, it opens the mind to wonder beyond what is seen and only dimly perceived. I like this kind of scene. Very little is known, and yet it's decorated lavishly with absence. Art, before it's made, may be like this. And art, when finished or left unfinished, may be like this. And love, so long in understanding, may be like this. I suppose we need reflection. We need something beyond us pointing back. And perhaps we need to imagine a house no bigger than a dot on the ridge is the home of someone who spends the morning or evening dabbling in beauty or having elevated thoughts on what makes beauty beautiful and how something missing is key. And perhaps we need to look at the world and imagine something that isn't there, and then imagine something that is. I'll skip that one. Okay, two more. Sorry. A genuine Davy Crockett coonskin cap. Somewhere in there in the early years, it was important for me to get to Tennessee, where I knew I could acquire for my adventuring mind a symbol of my desire for adventure and my wilderness imaginings, a symbol I thought would make them true. A genuine Davy Crockett coonskin cap. I was enthralled by the history in what is now regarded as a myth. So be it. It mattered to the boy I was. I didn't know the cap was made of rabbit fur or the tail was fake. I also, last poem here, but before I finish, I want to thank Linda Gregerson and Bob Wrigley for two excellent and completely stimulating lectures today. And the interview with Mr. Gioia was just a delight. Highlights of the day for me. This is called Bluebird Egg. When life was least inside it, something whose expertise was native to, incapable of plot, came by to suck the baby's yellow ink and gently turn the nicked end of the shell away. So placing it like a prop in the green scene below the skirt of the peach tree, whose fruit this year came just to blossom before a late arriving killing frost. As a work of art, the shell is perfect in form and perfectly deep in blue. But there is nothing in it now, and nothing in it now for art. God allows this snuffing out, and still I let him be my darling. It isn't always easy, you, God, who made the birds and trees and death